I have a couple of housekeeping announcements to start with first, and then we will go right into this. First thing, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We've never done anything like this, and we threw it together really last minute, literally on, Joe, what was this, like Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning? I was like, hey, what do you think about doing a live interview? And
so this is what happened. And Andrew texted me on Monday afternoon, and then I didn't respond. And then on Tuesday morning, he texted me like, should we do this? And I was like, well, I'm about to drive across country. Can we do it tomorrow? And then as of about like 2 o'clock, I think, or 1 o'clock, you managed to make all this happen, Andrew.
Yep. So here we are. So thank you all for joining us. This is a great turnout. We're at capacity with the registrations at almost 500 people. So it's just awesome. I would just ask for a little bit of patience with some of the technology stuff. If this is the first time doing it, so I hope that we're going to do it right. I'm really hoping though that Zoom is just a really intuitive platform to use with these webinars. We're going to run for about an hour. And I want the format to be pretty conversational. Hunter Hall, who's you guys can probably all see, he's sitting in the Lord of the Rings chair with the with the beautiful beard. So Hunter is involved with our planning course. He's also a standout alumni. So Hunter is going to be. I got Hunter involved just to help out with some of the fielding questions from you guys. So anything, Hunter? Before I get going with Joe, anything to add on the housekeeping?
No, not really. I'm just going to do my best to manage these questions as they come in.
Okay.
And kick them over to you so we can kind of address everything.
Okay. And they're going to come at you fast, I bet. So, all right. So Joe,
I guess they will.
Joe, I guess the first question for you is, when are you coming back to work?
Great question. I checked out my email today. So I work in managing curriculum and guiding trips with Andrew. And I told him I'd be officially working yesterday, which up until this point has not happened yet. But I do have a fully drafted email to send to you, Andrew, which I have not hit send on yet.
Take your time. It's okay. You deserve some time off. So I want to kind of know, so you finished this thing on Monday morning at like 6:30 or something like that. So why don't you explain to us what life has been like since then? Like, how much have you been sleeping? How much have you been eating? What's the recovery been like?
It's been fun. The finish was awesome, as you'd probably expect. I was surprised by a bunch of people. So there were 8 people at the finish, with a lot of my best friends and sort of my Boston family, some people who came up. And that was really exciting. We spent like 3 hours afterwards. Within about 30 minutes of finishing, I had finished a chai tea, which I love chai tea. I'd finished a Coke. I'd finished like a liter of water. I'd finished a kombucha, and I'd finished a Heady Topper beer. And this is like 45 minutes within finishing. And so I was really on a high, had, this very emotional moment, really satisfying moment, because my big goal was to go under 5 days. As the kind of event wore on, I was like 5 days. That's kind of my sweet spot. And after that, I went home still on a kind of runner's high, literally. And it was just me and Katie. We're in this kind of log cabin in Vermont. We immediately made a fire, made a bunch of tea, hung out. I've just been relaxing since then. I've had the worst curse of this entire thing is I developed a really bad kind of throat infection or issue on trail. And so that's kind of limited how much I can eat now. So I can't eat I have a hard time eating a lot of foods. So what I can eat, I try to eat in large quantities, but it has made it somewhat difficult up until this point. So as much as I'd love to just be eating and sleeping as much as I can, actually having the throat has sort of messed with my idyllic recovery.
So this throat isn't accompanied by like a fever and a dry cough and I'm gonna assume that, that would make the story even better if you set an unsupported speed record on the Long Trail while having COVID. But I don't.
I do have COVID toe, but no, I don't have COVID toe. But it feels like I have COVID toe, if anyone knows what that is. Which is basically just a blistering of your toes.
Got it. So what's the longest you've slept in a single 24-hour period?
Since finishing or on the Long Trail?
Since finishing.
Since finishing, I slept like 13 hours last night.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all good.
So let's kind of set the stage for this attempt. How long had you been planning this?
I had wanted to do, so I'd done the Pacific Crest Trail, I'd done the Appalachian Trail, some like big long efforts, and I'd always wanted to do a shorter, like mid-length FKT. And, you know, there's a few really iconic ones out there, but the Long Trail is, in my opinion, the most rugged and challenging and still competitive of those FKTs. And it's also sort of in my backyard being in Boston. I'd even tried it. I sort of had some unfinished business on the Long Trail. I attempted it in 2015 and I made it 90 miles. My knee swelled up like a watermelon. I passed out the next day on public transportation going into work. It just totally destroyed me. And, you know, that's kind of been one of the few ultra endurance events and routes that I've sort of had my eye on that I've really wanted to get back to. So this whole year I've been thinking about it.
But your plan wasn't, I mean, I feel like at the end of June, weren't you planning on getting on the JMT? Like, didn't your whole like kind of spring plan get thrown?
Yeah. Initially, when I was looking at the summer, I was thinking maybe I could do the Long Trail and JMT. And because my wife and I, so because Katie and I are moving across country, we were like, oh, I'd love to do the JMT and the Long Trail, but it's just too much logistically to swing in. And then because of Corona, because of adjusted timelines, we were like, well, like Long Trail might be kind of the shot and the opportunity to go after. So yeah, I pivoted from the JMT to the Long Trail. And it made a special kind of sense to me because it is, you know, I am leaving New England tomorrow and getting on a car driving across country. So it's a real kind of goodbye to New England.
Okay, I'm just looking at some questions here. So Jim Meyer, I think, asks a good one. He says, why did you do this in mud season? Was this deliberate? So like, I mean, if you'd had your option, would it have been better to do this at a different time of year?
I don't think so. Maybe July, or maybe later June. As far as rain goes, June is a low precipitation month. And up to Memorial Day, it's really bad. And then after Memorial Day and through June, it's sort of a crapshoot for a lot of Vermont. I actually didn't experience that much mud. Like when I did the AT, I think I was in late July, maybe early August in Vermont. And I felt like I hit more mud on the AT section of the Long Trail then than I did going in June. They had a good dry stretch of weather. Did get hit by a storm during it, but it didn't really impact like long-term trail conditions. It made it miserable for a day, but the mud wasn't terrible.
Okay. So what did you do for training? Like if you were, so it sounds like earlier in the spring, you were planning on doing the JMT at least first. And then did you like, what were you doing for training then? And then did you, when you finally settled on the Long Trail, did you like change your training at all?
I was putting in this whole year, I've put in a lot of really good training, mostly between like 60 and 70 miles a week. But then once maybe 60 and 80 miles a week. And then once coronavirus happens, this is around March, I was able to sort of change my daily structure around. So I went from maybe doing 2,000 feet of vertical gain a week to doing like 6 to 10,000 feet of vertical gain a week. So this year in the last few months, I've really upped vertical gain. I've upped my mileage to make it more like 80 to 100. I've been doing like track and speed workouts. I've been trying to periodize my training, having really targeted long runs while also having nice, easy recovery days, while also having kind of vert days. And then as I got closer to the event, I got a little more training specific where the week leading up to it, my wife and I were just hanging out in New Hampshire and I was doing a bunch of hikes, very little running actually, with, you know, pack weight on.
So the one thing I've always wondered with, you know, like the Long Trail and even like some really hard ultras, it's no longer it's no longer like a running event. So I start wondering like the value of, running, 60, 80, 100 miles a week and running 5, 10, 20,000 vertical feet versus, putting some weight on your back and spending, 15 hours on your feet at a 3 mile an hour pace. Can you speak to that at all? Like, what do you think like the relative benefit is of those two strategies?
Well, my favorite thing I read about training and about elite athletes doing FKTs on Reddit was someone commenting like, well, if a 350 miler went and did the long trail, they just crush, you know, anything out here. But like, he's still a great athlete with great fitness. And the truth for the long trail and for a lot of ultras like you're discussing, Andrew, is that like you have to balance your health in addition to your fitness. So I had like a throat issue that I had terrible back chafing. I had bad crotch chafing. I had foot blisters. I had sleep deprivation. I had extreme fatigue and like caloric deficit. So it's balancing your fitness with also your health, which often runners, you know, don't ever have to cross that line.
Right. Yeah, I think if I could,
especially for like a, you know, 5-day event like I was doing.
I think what you're speaking to is that there's a, like when it's, at some point it stops becoming just a pure running race, and there's like a skill and like a self-awareness. And the longer it gets, the more important those sort of that knowledge becomes relative to just being really fast. Yeah. So let's talk about, I remember talking, we were, I think we're having like a normal like Thursday business meeting, and this was like the week before, and you weren't even sure if you were going to be able to get into the state of Vermont. So what were like the hiccups or like the red tape involved in actually pulling this thing off, given the state of restrictions in Vermont right now?
Yeah, I almost just called it and didn't even do it because of COVID and because of state restrictions. And literally every day it was just kind of like my chance of doing it. I saw going from like 50 to 40 to 30 to 20. Basically what I needed was, as far as I could tell, like my impact was very minimal. And I spoke with a few health professionals and got their thoughts. And it was kind of like, well, really what I'm doing is I'm going self-supported or unsupported the entire time. I'm not using any trail towns. I'm outdoors. I'm having minimal impact with people. I'm literally going from one end of the border to the other. There's no support crew who's in Vermont to support me who could be exposing other people. Like the actual medical risk is pretty minimalized, but that didn't change the fact that Vermont has very strict border access, where they said you had to have a full 2-week quarantine, and they weren't doing any kind of rentals. They weren't doing any kind of campground access. Basically, you had to be staying at someone's house in Vermont and quarantining without doing any kind of outdoor exposed activity that includes hiking, going to a grocery store, in order to be self-quarantined for 2 weeks. So it was a very, like, as strict as you could get. And then on Friday, they announced a change in that, where if you were coming from a low risk county, which we've been staying in Grafton County in New Hampshire for about 2 weeks, then you will be allowed to transfer as if you were a Vermont citizen without any quarantine restrictions. So we were like, we happen to be in Grafton County, which is a low risk county, and they're changing this like within like 2 days, 2 days before kind of like our cutoff date, where we were just going to pack up our shit, get in a car, and drive across country.
Welcome to the new normal.
I know.
I feel like, yeah. Yeah. So by the way, I've been getting text messages today from Dave Miller and Alan Dixon, because
Nice.
They're all heading up to Alaska, and like it's the same sort of deal where, like, you know, they had wanted to go since we weren't able to run the guided trips, and but like up until the very last minute, like they weren't like totally sure if it was going to happen. They were just like went into it knowing that they would have to be really flexible, and that all of their plans might just fall through because of just the dynamic nature of this. So so there are two like fastest known times on this trail. There's a supported style and there's an unsupported. Why did you choose to carry all of your stuff from start to finish and not have Katie just hook you up at various road junctions along the way?
It's masochistic, man. You gotta love the pain.
Well, it's funny you say that.
You gotta love the hurt.
So Nicole Popovich asks, she says,
oh, hi, Nicole, by the way.
I know, right? Nicole, I'm sure she's like cuddled up with her kittens right now. She says, if it causes so much discomfort, why do you do it? She says, I get it. It's because you're awesome, but you're also nuts. And then a heart.
I think that sums it up, right?
So
She
what
just
is
answered her own question.
but like, let's go into the why. So I mean, you just
Yeah.
spent like 5 days, beating yourself to smithereens, not sleeping, getting some sort of like weird throat infection thing, and I mean, you've got a good story on the other end, but it probably wasn't really that much fun relative to, I don't know, maybe like a vacation in Cancun. So give us the motivation here.
Everyone, one man's, I can't think of a good dumb colloquial phrase, so I'm not going to try to pull one out of my ass, but I tried to. No, I really, I don't know. I think about this a bit and I get asked this a lot. And really for me, what it comes down to is I really love being strategic and pushing myself. And I think that's what's made me really good at the Appalachian Trail. The Pacific Crest Trail I just went into, I had a support crew. I just flew by the seat of my pants. I got by because it was not a super intense record and I had an amazing support crew and we had fun and made it work.
And you're also like 23 years old and
just like having a good time, right?
Yeah.
And then the AT, I kind of was like, I took that experience and I saw what like Meltzer had done and what Jurek had done and was like, wait a second, if you are self-supported, there's actually some opportunities to further what they've done that might negate kind of the differences in not having a crew. And I just really like, when it comes to FKTs, I really just like love the style of it. Like I actually enjoyed a decent amount of it. Like there was a lot of it that was miserable, but going over Camel's Hump in 50-mile-an-hour winds at 1 a.m. and then bombing down like a rocky chute was just like some of the coolest, most exhilarating stuff you could do. I honestly, to the finish, I had the exact same thought as Nicole. I was like, why am I pushing for this 5-hour barrier goal, right? And I was like, this is just stupid. It doesn't make any, I'm going to break the record, yada, yada, yada. It's going to be cool. But like I was on major sleep deprivation. I was in a caloric deficit. I was having a hard time running for more than 30 seconds on like smooth downhill. So I was pretty much power hiking, and I was like, I'm literally going to power hike for the next 8 hours through the entire night and finish and rah, rah, go me. But then what happened is I had a lot of battery issues and I ended up having just this like dynamite, lightning, crazy blitzkrieg finish that just totally invigorated and kind of gave me a totally different perspective on my experience. So for me, it's a big part of it is pushing yourself to your limit really shows you what you're capable of, which makes, the friends that you have and it makes those relationships sweeter on the other side. And it makes the experience when you look back upon it, you tend to romanticize it and think it was better than it actually was, which I'm already doing. So that's good.
So Buzz Burrell at the end of one trip with me said, this is a great quote. He said, the greatest asset of an endurance athlete is short-term memory loss.
What did you say? I already forgot.
I mean, this is the only reason you'll ever do these things again is because you kind of forget how much it sucks. So, so just as like a technical clarification, so Stephen Groudon asks, are you able to get any assistance from others while attempting an unsupported run? Can you accept like water, food, anything from others during the attempt, even if it's not intentional?
Quick shout out. I think that's my high school coach, Groudog. So
No.
Shout out to
maybe Groudon, yeah.
Stephen Groudon, yeah, aka Groudog, yeah. Anyway, shout out to him. So as far as being the different classifications of self-supported, supported, and unsupported, I'll only really talk about unsupported because that's what I was doing. It implies that you're not relying on any kind of human. That's a terrible way to phrase it. You're not relying on any kind of support from any other person, including previously organized support by yourself. So you can use water on the trail. I had an issue with my Sawyer where the O-ring, which creates a suction barrier for your Sawyer filter, didn't work. I had to use leaves to fix that, to make a suction barrier. So I was using leaves from the trail. But I couldn't have gone into a gas station and bought like a candy bar. I wouldn't have, if I had my headlamp issue, I wouldn't have said, hey, can I borrow your headlamp for the last day? I really need this. Sorry, AT through hiker. I'm more important than you, right?
If you don't give it to me, I'm going to have to navigate using the back glow of my GoPro.
Dude, that was so
But
funny.
we're gonna get there.
We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there.
I couldn't believe the stories that Katie's sending me, and I'm thinking, I'm like, Joe, like, you're planning on spending like, over 5 days, probably, I don't know, like, 30 hours in the dark, and you didn't think to like, make sure that your headlamp was like in good
I
shape.
should have taken your online backpacking course. Then I would have known.
You would have had someone like Hunter saying like, Joe, I'm uncertain if your headlamp is going to be adequate for this.
I would have been telling myself,
Exactly.
hey, Joe, you're an idiot. Yeah.
Okay, so let's keep on moving here. Talk about, so Rohan Aurora wants to ask, what was your approach to pacing? So like, and I'm gonna maybe narrow it down and just say like, how much, like, were you planning on running, hiking, and then maybe as a second question related is like, how much moving were you planning to do relative to like either recovering or sleeping?
So my A, B, and C goal basically were like, my A goal and B goal were essentially the same, which was 20 or 19 hours of time on feet. So 19 hours moving, 1 hour camp time, and then 4 hours sleeping. And then my C goal was, what would that have been? 17 hours time on feet, 1 hour camp time, and 6 hours sleeping. So those were kind of the two angles that I took.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are those numbers, those ratios, or is that based on like what you did in the AT? Is that based on what other people told you might be the most sort of efficient way to go?
Yeah, it was a mix of both. I knew on the AT that I really like on the AT I knew I needed more sleep than that. Like I knew I needed 6 hours of sleep a night, but for something like this I could get in a little under. I thought maybe 4 hours was a little on the high side, but I didn't really want to take a risk of trying to burn myself out too early. And actually, Heather Anderson gave me some really good advice the night before. I was probably planning on sleeping for 4 hours straight. And she was like, no, you should absolutely split that up into 3, maybe even 4 naps, which I was like, that's good advice. But also that involves like, it's got into like the high 30s. So it's like, I'm not going to set up my bivy, my sleeping bag, take out all my stuff from my bag 3 different or 4 different times in a day just to sleep. So what I ended up doing from a time management perspective is I'd go the entire day, sleep from 9 to 11, go from 11:30 to 3, sleep from 3:30, sleep 2:30, sleep from 3 to 5, and then go on for the next push.
So John Curnow asks a pertinent question. He asks, what shelter did you use? Like, did you even carry one?
Yeah, I carried a Mountain Laurel Design bivy, super light bivy.
Okay, a super light bivy, so nothing with rain protection.
I had a poncho tarp, so I also had a Mountain Laurel Design poncho tarp that doubled if I needed it as rain. I didn't think I need it, but I brought it anyway.
Okay. A question towards Hunter. Hunter, if you see a student in our planning course who's proposing to bring a poncho tarp, what do you tell them?
Oh boy, comfortable with it. I would say that you need to get comfortable with it, and you kind of accept the inherent limitations of a poncho tarp and what kind of protection it will provide you. But obviously, if you're doing something like Joe, I'd say go for it.
Would you recommend it for any other type of trip?
Depends.
Yeah.
At my age, probably not, but maybe. It depends.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I used the poncho tarp a lot back in the early 2000s because it was a classic like multi-use ultralight item.
Mm-hmm.
But as I look back now, I mean, the gear was a lot different. So it was like a 10-ounce poncho tarp was like decent rain gear, decent shelter. But like at the time, I think like the latest rain jacket that was out there was still like 10 or 12 ounces. So it made a bigger difference then. I eventually concluded that poncho tarps aren't really good rain gear and aren't really good shelters. So
yeah, I kind of think with DCF now, you can get a really good shelter for like 12, 14 ounces. So it's kind of like,
yeah. Okay, so let's kind of keep on moving here. Oh, so John Heffner asks a good question too. Do you have to train for sleep deprivation, or like did you sleep more ahead of time just to catch up, or like give yourself a bank? Like what did you do?
I mean, I have a hard time banking sleep, quote unquote, so I didn't do anything revolutionary. I also confirmed I was doing the Long Trail about 3 days in advance. So that was, my preparation was mostly focused on running to the grocery store and buying every single last thing that I thought I needed and mixing it, organizing it, and packing it.
Okay, so that's perfect lead in then. So Seth Biden asks, here's the short question, and I'll give you a little bit more context. He says, can you explain your hydration, fueling, and recovery through foods and stretching during this hard effort? And I'm just going to have you focus on food. And he says, as a trail runner, I am oftentimes conflicted between endurance fueling and traditional backpacking foods. So it's sort of this like balance of like weight and caloric density versus foods that are easily digestible. So what was your what was your plan? What was your food plan? Like how much food per day, how much total food weight? And then by the end, like what sort of proved to be like winners and losers?
I would say, so my plan was 9,000 calories or like 8,500 calories a day. It was all caloric dense food. Yeah, I loaded up, man.
8,500 calories?
Yep. And so it was a total of 18 or 19 pounds of food, I think, that I started out with.
Right, because that's, I mean, if you're doing 150 calories an ounce, which is like if you were eating like M&Ms or Pringles the entire time.
Which is what I was doing.
That's 3.5 pounds of food per day. Okay, that seems like a lot to me, but I mean, did you?
It was a little much. I think I would have done better if I was at like 7,000 and had food that I was really dialed in on. Which there was a few foods that it also was weird. Like the throat thing that I had, basically, something had to do with like the oils of nuts. So like on the AT, I ate so many pounds of nuts. It's psycho. But halfway through this, like I just couldn't eat. I couldn't swallow nuts. Like it would just hurt my throat too bad. So it just cut out a food that I was kind of relying on to eat. But I had this strategy of like 8,500 calories a day, trying to eat, a few hundred calories an hour, all more traditional backpacker food rather than like performance food, you could say. Which I would still stand by, other than I think there are a few foods that cause just like issues with my, like the biggest issue you have is just like usually very dry, very dense, hard to chew food in large quantities. So, I'd have to be eating all my meals while simultaneously drinking water. My, tongue got cut up. I had a hard time eating some of the foods that I had brought in because of that. And I also fell asleep while eating a few times, which then I think contributed to what was happening in my throat because there was like junk in my mouth.
Right.
So
I need to hear about that a little bit more. You fell asleep while you were eating.
No, this happens. Yeah. I mean, how many times I'm sure, Joe, you've woken up with like a half-eaten energy bar in your sleeping bag, right?
Yeah. It's so bad. I mean, but it's not always like the worst is when I'm having so what I do usually is I'll sit in my bivvy and I'm closed off from everything and I just have my water and I have like maybe plantain chips or I have trail mix or I have like Pringles and I'm just shoveling it into my mouth, but I'm so tired at this point that not everything makes it in. So like a fair amount of it falls out and then I'm sipping water every other sip. And then I just do that until I either feel sufficiently full, but usually I'm like, okay, I just need to sleep at this point because I can do this all night and I don't really want to. And then it becomes a decision of like, do I brush my teeth? And at that point I'm already dozing off and wake up a few hours later to my alarm.
So another really good question from Justin Cornell. He says what? No skirka beans and rice?
Only the peanut sauce.
Did you take?
No, I'm kidding.
You didn't take any hot meals at all?
No, nothing hot.
Okay, I can't imagine just eating like Pringles and nuts for 5 days.
What was the first thing you ate after the trip? That's what I want to know.
Oh, first thing I ate after. Oh, I felt so bad. So Katie made these really delicious coconut. Well, I assume they're really delicious coconut cookie kind of things. and she was so proud of him. And I just like took a bite, and I was like, I'd spit it out, and I was like, I'm so sorry. I can't eat this. It hurts too much. And she told me, was like, yeah, I made all these like, and she'd made like 20 or 30 of them, right? Like individual ones. So it's like, it's not like she made like, oh, I made half a dozen. It's fine. It's okay. It's like, no, we made these for the long haul. But the most substantial thing that I ate was I had like dinner was okay, but the first thing that I really felt comfortable eating that I really wanted to eat was a like rising crust DiGiorno pepperoni pizza, which was like 2,200 calories, which I ate in about probably 10 minutes.
I'm always surprised at like so this happens with like really big long runs. And then with what you're doing, it's on another level, but I'll get done with I remember last year I went up my last hurrah, and like it was like the beginning of October was this big loop up in the Indian Peaks. It was like 10 hours, 10,000 vertical feet. And I got back and like I couldn't eat for like 4 hours. And then like I went to bed like having had maybe just just something really small. I don't remember what, maybe some, something tiny, maybe even just, or a beer or something. And then like woke up in the middle of the night just starving. And I would assume that probably your experience was similar. Like when you finished, your appetite wasn't there, but then it's probably been really like accelerated or like on high ever since you've been done, right?
Exactly. Well, it's been weird because like I have the DiGiorno's adventure, and then I slept for an hour and a half, and then I woke up and was like, dinner time, let's go. And then we make like eggs and broccoli and cheese and stuff. I take like 5 bites, and I think I had something else going on too, but I like got lightheaded, and I was like, I'm sorry, Katie, I need to like excuse myself and go to bed. And I know it's 6:30, but like, focus. So I like didn't eat anything for dinner. Like the DiGiorno pizza was mostly what I ate, other than some, I guess I had oatmeal that morning. But then today I've just been, like every hour on the hour I'm eating a lot of food. But yeah, Andrew, I think you're totally right. Like I do that after hard long runs. Like I'll go order just a crap ton of food and then sit down to eat it and have like 2 bites.
Yeah. Jessica Porch asks a good question. Did you brush your teeth at all during the trip?
I did, and I wish I did it more because I think I'd be a lot happier right now if I did.
It's funny how just brushing your teeth can kind of reset your palate a little bit.
Yeah,
I find like
it's just basic hygiene. Yeah, like a lot of basic hygiene stuff.
So let's actually go there. So I had written down some questions on that. So talk about like self-care a little bit. So you said you'd allocated like 19 hours to moving, an hour to like camp type stuff, 4 hours to sleeping. So like in that hour of like camping, you're trying to like take care of yourself too. So, could you maybe talk about like you had sent me a text that I laughed at. Talk about maybe like foot care. How do you deal with like sore muscles? Like what was kind of the routine on that?
Yeah, sore muscles, you can't do too much about. Really what, like managing your skin is the biggest thing. Like your skin is a living, breathing thing that if you don't take care of, it will come back to bite you hardcore. So mandatory things for me before I went to bed, my socks always came off. I always put Aquaphor lip repair on sort of hot spots on my feet. I gave myself like a hiker shower. So basically like washing like my crotch and other spots. I learned this after I'd already learned this on the AT, but I've forgotten about it. I like started washing my back and my armpits because you start to get rashes there. I started washing my face. I started brushing I brushed my teeth on the first day, on the third day, and the fourth day because you kind of forget some of those things that happen. But, I'd always make sure that I spent the time to like use Aquaphor on my feet, on my crotch. And that was like a mandatory thing, like either when I got up or before I went to bed every single day, that if I didn't do, I knew would really come back to bite me.
It's funny to me, like I remember it's like on the AT, my first through hike, and like, I wore as like a badge of honor how dirty and gross I was. And that's so typical, like, where you see those thru hikers and they just, they have a beard like yours, or if they've been growing it for a while, like Hunter's. Hunter has the main beard. Joe is more like, what's that, like a Tennessee beard, Joe?
Yeah, it's a Tennessee beard.
Yeah.
This is maybe even a
Tennessee
little less.
beard. I've never heard that. That's good.
Yeah. And but we're just filthy and gross and smelly. And then as I've gotten, I'm not sure, older or wiser or more experienced, but I put a real emphasis on like self-care, and I think it's like the experience is way better. So Joe, you had mentioned earlier about your Sawyer squeeze, and Steve McLaughlin asks, he's curious what you use for water purification. And he says that he's seen Aquamira cause mouth irritation. And maybe if you could go into like why you chose your Sawyer squeeze.
I chose Sawyer because I've used it before and I really, really trust it. It's a big part of it. I used it on the AT. I love having front access water availability, especially when you're on something on the East Coast. There's going to be a lot of streams, but it's also going to be very humid. So you want to be drinking a lot of water and you want to have easy access. And I just don't want to, like, when I want to drink water, I want to drink it then and have it be done with. And I don't want to be also, since I'm holding trekking poles, I have my bag, I want to be moving the entire time while I'm doing that. So I use, a microfilter because it allows me to have that kind of like water bottle front access. It's quick, easy. You do have to back flush it every once in a while. I still have run into issues with small, what do you call it? Like weak flow, I guess you call it, where it just like, you're not getting water fast enough, which has been frustrating. But other than that, it's a great solution for something like this.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move towards, like, you're now on the trail, and I had a couple of questions. I see one from Arshami, and then I had one come through over email too. Basically, like, did you see any other long trail thru hikers out there? Like, what's kind of the status of the trail? Like, another guy who had written me, Greg, says he's getting ready to thru hike it next week, and he'd love to hear a little bit about what the trail's like in terms of people volume and whether people are using the shelters, what the water conditions are. What's sort of the state of the trail right now?
Yeah, it's weird. Like when I first started, I saw probably 10 thru hikers. Maybe I saw probably 8 thru hikers on the first day. So on the northern terminus, the most remote section near J Peak, and they were all people finishing the trail, which means they would have been out there for 2 or 3 weeks, which means they would have been out there right around the time when the Long Trail was still iffy on recommending people to go, and it was peak mud season. So there are definitely people out hiking. The farther I got, the kind of more typical trail culture you'd expect. So there's definitely, a sense of camaraderie, and there's a fair amount of hikers out there. I'd probably say I saw maybe 80-ish thru hikers, most of them going northbound. And people are using shelters, but usually it's like, when I look in a shelter, it'd usually be like 1 or 2 people in the shelter, even though the shelters are supposed to be closed, or at least in the Green Mountain section, they're supposed to be closed. So that's a little bit unclear as far as how much people are actually abiding by regulations and what recommendations are. But there's a fair amount of people using it, and it still has sort of that hiker vibe and mentality. And the trail conditions themselves are actually pretty nice, despite, some people have been worried about there not being enough resources for trail crews to get out, enough time for trail crews to get out. I found the overall trail conditions to be pretty solid.
Okay. Yeah, my guess is that most people realize enforcing government mandates on the Long Trail is pretty difficult.
Yeah, it's like tracking someone down on the Long Trail is going to be a pretty tall order.
So, yeah.
Where's the smelly guy who's carrying all his shit? Oh, that's everyone.
So let's kind of jump into this a little bit. Maybe talk about like, what was like the first wall that you hit? Like, what was like your first low point?
It was day 2 was just like a rough day. Day 1, I got like 55, 56 miles. I was hoping to go 60 miles. So that was like my A goal. So I was like, oh man, I'm hitting 3 miles an hour. the northern 170 miles, so the area where I started, is like way more challenging for a few different reasons than the southern half. So I was like, man, I'm in the northern half, I'm putting in the miles, I'm almost on pace, like awesome. Day 1 was great. Day 2, there was a thunderstorm. I go over some of the nastiest mountains. The trail got really muddy. My feet were wet the entire day. It rained on and off. So, I spent like 30 minutes deciding if I was going to put my poncho top on or not. And it was a light drizzle, and then it started pounding rain. So I put it on, spend all this time doing that. 10 minutes later, it clears up and is perfectly fine. So I take it off, and then I get dumped with rain again. So I had a lot of like inefficiencies, and my pace went probably from like 3 miles an hour to like under 2.5 miles an hour, which was just really frustrating. And also, I really had high aspirations of doing like a mid 50 day again, but I ended up with like 46 on day 2, and it just didn't feel safe all the time, because you have to take a lot of risks with something like this. Like, what you can't really, even if you've done the AT, it's hard to understand the terrain on the northern section of the Long Trail. It's really like the whites in a lot of ways, where you're just hitting straight roots and rocks. And it's like, if you're going downhill, there's not like one patch of dirt that your foot's landing on. You're literally going from rock to rock to rock. And when that's wet, and when you're running and you're trying to make time, it just feels a little, it gives you the creeps a little bit, on top of, me going a bit slower than I'd been hoping to go. So by the time I got to the end of the day 2, I just felt kind of morally beaten, cold. My feet, it was clear that my feet were now in a bad place. That's when I started to get my throat issue. I started being like, oh, I think I might be getting a cold or something. So all these things started to really come on day 2 after this kind of really nice day 1. That was a good start to the trek.
So I've got a question from Sandy Hilton. She says she wants to go back into the sleep topic a little bit, and since now we're on like day 2, she says, were you planning your sleeping, or did you just decide sort of instantaneously that you're stumbling around too much, and just that the trade-off of like losing some time by sleeping was worth that investment?
Yeah, we talked about this briefly, Andrew, a while ago, where it's like, when's the best time to do an FKT? And we were talking about how sunlight is such a vital aspect of something like this, and it's just so much easier to make ground. So I knew my best miles were going to come while it was sunny out. So once the sun went down, I got my first power nap in. I'd do whatever miles I could through the night, and then I'd sleep until dawn. I'd pass out a little bit before dawn to wake up around dawn for the next day. So that I had a very structured routine that would fluctuate by 30 minutes, maybe, depending on how I was feeling. If there, I had to sleep near a water source, so a few things played into that, but it was pretty structured, I'd say.
Okay. So what was the gear that worked? Well, talk about your gear a little bit. I don't want to go into like too much detail. Hopefully at some point you'll post like a gear list. It's like, what was the gear that you went with? Kind of give us the overview, and like any like big winners or big losers.
Yeah, so I had the Mountain Laurel Design poncho tarp, super light bivy, Enlightened equipment, Revelation 30-degree quilt. I had a Polanta pack, Joey, which is like 35 liters, totally frameless, no support. I then had a modified Sol Z pad, so one of those, kind of just a foam pad that you can fold up that you see at REIs everywhere. That was modified to fit as my internal frame to help protect my back. And then I had shorts, t-shirt, a long sleeve, long pants, and a few electronics, and a crap ton of food. And 2 600 milliliter water bottles was pretty much my entire kit.
Okay. You're also carrying like a pound of rocks.
I was carrying a pound of rocks.
Do you wanna tell us about this part of the trip?
Yeah, totally. So, we've talked about COVID and how that sort of impacted things. Going into the Long Trail, of course, everything with the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd and all these national protests, it just felt like the ultimate sort of white privilege to be doing an FKT. And especially with the outdoor industry and its racial composition. You know, it's like a very typically regarded as a very white industry. And there's a, you know, it's a more than we'll go in today for why that is. And I don't think I should be the person telling you why that is, or really necessarily being the person who gives the you know, authoritative description on why that is. But I did want to sort of recognize the struggle that our country is going through and sort of the inaccessibility to the outdoors, and to help carry that sort of movement that's happening in our cities, all the way to our trailheads, into our wilderness spaces, into our outdoor community. Knowing that, you know, our outdoor community, whether that's trail runners, hikers, backpackers, guides, it's going to be a stronger and more resilient community if we have, you know, a variety of voices speaking into it. And so I carried 8 different rocks in honor of the 8 Can't Wait campaign regarding changing sort of police, how police, like police restrictions on force. And also each of those 8 rocks that I had the first name of a different person who'd been African-American, who'd been murdered by police brutality or by civilians in an unjust manner. So I carried 13.5 ounces of rocks with my entire pack as a memento to them, as sort of like a small token, you know, to a really much larger cause and problem that exists in the U.S.
And you raised quite a bit of money as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so we have raised over 6,000. You can still donate. We're raising money for Outdoor Afro. So the kind of things where I'm hoping that this run will help highlight is to help make, you know, the outdoor community and promote it as a sort of accessible and encouraging place to be. But also we're looking to raise awareness and funds for an organization called Outdoor Afro, which helps promote you know, African-American participants and leaders in the outdoor community. So we've raised $6,000, which is pretty awesome, which we're really stoked about.
Decent amount of money.
I know, it's pretty cool.
If people want to make an additional donation, what's the kind of, where is their link? Where would they go?
Yeah, you can go to outdoorafro.com. I think you can also Google our Facebook fundraiser, which is just Long Trail, then X Outdoor Afro. Maybe Hunter, I don't know if you can put that in the link there, or maybe we can send it around afterwards.
I'll drop it into the chat in a second.
Cool.
Okay. Hey, Joe, can we get Katie on the line?
Oh yeah, let me go see. I might have to go yell at her to come. I'm gonna go pull
Wait a
her.
minute. Is she not tuned in?
She's
upstairs?
not in the room. No, she's outside the room. I told her she didn't have to sit in on this.
I thought
Very
she
nice
would have
of
been
you.
watching it from another room. No? Okay.
Oh no. She is
She's-
enjoying a bonfire right now, but I think I probably can get her in here in a minute or two, or I can go physically pull her in here. But I just texted her.
Perfect. Let's see if she comes in. Okay. So Hunter, can you rattle off a few other questions that you're seeing come through that you think are good ones?
Yes, I can. A lot of questions. I'm trying to keep up here. I think my favorite one is, what is the weirdest thing that happened to you on the trail? And I think that was Rohan Aurora, I believe. What's the weirdest thing that happened to you?
Oh, weirdest thing. There's a lot of weird things that happened to me on the trail. Oh man, weirdest thing. One of the so the best, Katie's now made it into the room and she'll join in a second. But before that, my thing that I just have to talk about, because I thought I was so genius and I need to pat myself on the back every once in a while, is I got to the top of Camel's Hump. I was coming down and had my Sawyer filter. And in order to get the pressure right in the water bottle, you unsqueeze the Sawyer and you put it back in, or you switch it between bottles. While doing that, the O-ring fell out, which I talked about earlier, which you don't think is that big of a deal, but basically it means you can't pressure the bottle. And if you do, water will just fall out the side. So basically you can't filter any water unless you're sucking on it. And Sawyers are very, very hard to suck through. So basically I was looking at me drinking Vermont water for the next 3 days straight, unless I could figure out another solution. And
there are no beavers in Vermont, don't worry.
So what I ended up figuring out was I tried all these different things with plastic, with like spare things on my pack. And eventually I realized if you put a leaf in there and then tighten that, the leaf would create its own suction, so that you could actually create that pressure and you could use it like a normal soil filter, but they're only
Brilliant.
one-time use items. Yeah.
That is
Brilliant.
amazing.
A good
I felt
follow-up to that actually is from Esther Colwell, and they said, did you have any GI issues on the trail?
This is TMI, but so we talked about food.
That's
a
why
little
I
bit.
asked.
Then you just stop
everyone
there.
came here
You
for
just
the
stop. You
TMI.
just say, that's TMI. Next question. You don't say, okay, that's TMI, but let me tell you all about it now.
What I'll preface it with is because of my throat, I had to start eating a mixture of, I put water in an almond Oreo mix, and you can imagine the outcome from that. Yeah. So I basically had a bag of Oreos, and I had almonds that I couldn't eat anymore that I threw in there because I wanted to throw them away. And then I realized I needed about like as much food as I could get, and the only way I could eat it was making it into a slushie or cold soaking it, a loose term of cold soaking, and that caused some pretty interesting end results. But
last question that I'll ask, and I'll kick it back to Andrew. But I'm wondering myself.
Katie's coming on after that.
Quite
after
frankly,
this too, if that's cool.
From Jared Hunt is, how did you? Can you share a bit about your mental game? How did you stay sharp and be kind to your mind during this?
I just had to remind myself to laugh every once in a while. I mean, it's so easy to beat yourself up the whole time. There's always this change, and this is why I like doing adventures like this, because like you start to realize this perspective. It's always like day 2 or 3, you start to chill out and be like, whatever happens, man. Like if I get the record, that's awesome. If I don't, can't I just enjoy like having some fun on the long trail? And so that was really important to me, was to, have those lighter moments, laugh at yourself, and really just try to enjoy it, because it's really easy to get sucked into times, into distances, into this trail so hard, I'm not going fast enough. And you need that positivity because it's all coming from yourself. You guys want me to bring Katie in on here?
Yes, we do.
All right, awesome. I'm going to take my speakers out, so let me know if... Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can Katie hear us without,
Yeah.
Is there like a speaker? Okay. Hi, Katie.
Hi,
Um,
Katie.
So Katie, tell us, like, what did you do while Joe was like on a long trail for 5 days?
That is a great question. So I've been in Vermont in this awesome rustic cabin that's a friend of ours. And so I think I spent probably most of the time Joe was running, thinking about where he was and trying to sort of, piece together, the GPS went off here. Let me like look on all trails where I think this is, and then let me map this to this other long trail picture so I can try to figure out the mileage. So it was, a lot of sleuthing, a lot of detective work. And I think Josh is on this call too, but a lot of me texting with our friend Josh Katzman about, where do we think he is now? Should we be worried about this? So I think, basically trying to piece together what's going on from the occasional audio message and some sporadic GPS ping.
So yeah, how was he communicating with you? Like, what was that? I thought I saw like a spot on your pack, but
Yeah.
it was a spot. Wow, Joe, welcome to 2010, buddy.
Oh yeah.
God, I know, right? It's like we have to use like below grade GPS tracker just to cause even more panic.
Hey, is anyone from InReach or Garmin on this call? Can you hook this guy up with an InReach, please?
For my sake.
Yeah, I would say Katie
right, just for Katie, if nothing else, right?
Katie might not mention this, so I will. She was like, I think I probably slept about as much as you during the entire trail.
Probably.
So Katie, you were pretty nervous while Joe was out there? Not nervous, but more anxious. Just what's he doing? Yeah. How's he going? Yeah.
I think it's just anxious, and then it's like this whole thing that you've been a part of, like planning and prepping for, and then all of a sudden you're just not there, and so it's just sort of you're just flying blind, and so I think it's a mix of excitement and anxiety, and sort of just trying to understand what it is he's going through with like a terrible GPS, and of course you're not going to have service for a lot of the time you're out there, so. And then I was also staying in a cabin that made a lot of noises, so I have to admit that was also part of my lack of sleep.
So what was the toughest message to get from Joe? What was like that sucks?
Yeah, totally. I think for sure it had to be day 2. I can't even remember exactly what time it was, but it was like, I think it had been raining all day, and I knew he had to get up and over Camel's Hump, and he was going to be doing that at night. And he was like dreading it. It was like, well, you know, things are going okay, but I still have Camel's Hump. And he just sounded really tired and like sort of confused, which is never what you want when somebody's going to be going up on like the biggest climb of the entire trail and be super exposed and like potentially bad weather. So I think just hearing sort of a little bit of doubt in someone like Joe, who's always so positive, was definitely like the hardest piece. But then, I mean, I think this whole thing was such a roller coaster. And Joe pointed out, it's like, I was getting tiny little snippets. So it was like 2 hours, it was a dark, what I interpreted as a dark hole. And then 3 hours later, he was back up on top of the world again. So it was sort of, when you hear the low points and then you don't hear anything for a little bit, that was the hardest piece of it, but always bounce back.
Yeah, that is the way these trips go. It's this continuous series of highs and lows, and it's crazy. Like as you get further along in the trip and more sleep deprived and more sort of like strung out, it's much easier to get triggered in either direction. So
Totally.
if anyone has read Heather Anderson's book, that's really clear of just like, you know, watching someone who's that sleep deprived, that stressed, like you're just reading about like how erratic her emotions are, just because she's just putting it all out there, and these little things that in a normal day wouldn't bother anyone just are, you know, send you off. So.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like, even in that last day, we were trying to decide when we were going to hike into the terminus, and it was like, you know, we thought it could be around a midnight or 2 a.m. finish at the latest, and then you get a message at 6 o'clock that's like, my energy levels aren't good. And it was just such mixed messaging, because he's like, well, it's great downhills, but it's a death march. And so you're like, what does that mean exactly? And like, is this really bad or is this really good? And so it's sort of like, exactly, I think a lot of that's the sleep deprivation, where it's like, I can't tell if certain things are dramatized, or if, you know, especially at the end, you know, when the light went out and I was like, you're going to stop 8 miles from the finish. And like, you're so close. But I'm glad that despite the sleep deprivation, you made a smart
So
call.
let's talk about this lighting situation. So Katie, I was getting your updates, and I just couldn't believe what I was reading about these lighting problems. So Joe, can you like talk us like what the big mistake was, and then what your solutions were when your primary headlamp
Don't
started?
quote unquote my solutions. They solve the problem. No, that's very fair. So basically, the context is I had a Petzl Now and great headlamp, but it's only rechargeable battery. So you only have that battery pack. So you have to plug it in, charge. You don't need any cords, which is nice. So I was like, oh, it's a nice headlamp that performs really well. The battery life, based on previous usage of it, should solve for this. And I also have like a what's the
Batteries?
like the Anchor?
Yeah, like you have like an Anchor power core. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. So like 10,000 mAh, whatever we can't ever.
I'm sure there's an electrical engineer on this
Yeah,
watching
like,
who could tell you what that means. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I had that, and then I had my
milliamp
phone.
hour. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. And then I had my cell phone, and so I was like after the first day or after the second day, I'd only used like a quarter of my external battery, and my headlamp only had used like a third of the charge on it. And so I was like, great, more than enough electricity to go around. We'll be fine. I know I'm going to have like a final push through an entire night, maybe 2 entire nights. It might be pushing 2 full night pushes, but we'll see. I'll figure it out one way or another. And then that next night, I ended up using more battery than I thought I would. And also I ended up waking up, charging my headlamp, but then I realized it was somehow it turned on because I slept with it to try to keep the battery warm. So it had turned on in my sleeping bag in the middle of the night. I know, right? There's a little lock feature too. I just didn't press the lock feature.
I don't know how to use the lock feature.
Because you're too tired to remember the lockout feature. Yeah.
I know. Oh my amateur hour.
Yeah.
So I realized that I probably was up shit creek, and but I thought maybe if I really pushed hard, going into that final day, because, you know, I had 68 miles to go as of about 24 hours before I finished, 26 hours before I finished. So I was like, I could make it from 4:45, and that math doesn't add up at all. Long story short,
Yeah.
as of 4:45 in the
68
morning,
miles in 15 hours wasn't going to happen. Yeah.
As of 4:45 in the morning, I had 68 miles to go. So I was like, if I do that an entire night, an entire push, I could probably make it there by 12, even by midnight, even by a conservative effort, which at that point, my headlamp had actually died the night before. It actually hadn't died. It had gone on low power mode, which I thought would last longer. Turns out it just actually had totally died. And my phone was at like 38%, which I was like, oh, that'll last a while. And I didn't turn my phone on the entire day except to send KV2 messages. And as a millennial, send one mandatory Instagram post. And
that was a selfie. That was
a selfie.
Yeah. True
Yep.
millennial right there. Yeah.
True millennial. So I went to bed and I was like, okay, I went to bed with like 34% battery. That's enough to get me pretty far. Like I have 16 miles to go when I went to bed at 9 p.m. because I hit a wall. Like at this point, you know, the 5-day barrier was at 6:30 in the morning the next day. And I had just been like, I'd been power hiking from probably 11 a.m. through 9 p.m. with some intermittent running. And it felt miserable. I had that like, why the hell?
March.
That was the death march. I was like, why am I out here? I'm not making bad time because it's really easy terrain comparatively to some of the other stuff. But I was like, I need a nap. Like before I do this, I know it's going to take an extended period of time through the night, and I'm going to make really slow time if I don't eat back some of the sleep deprivation that I'm in. So I go to bed, and when I wake up at 10:15, my battery all of a sudden is at 24%. And I have so it lost 8% just by turning it off and turning it on. And then I have 16 miles to go. And at that point, I'm like,
It was 11%.
No, it started at.
Anyway.
Yeah. So it was at.
I'm going to trust Katie on this one.
Yeah.
I bet her memory of this is better. Yeah.
Extreme sleep deprivation. So I wake up and then all of a sudden I'm just like, oh my God, I have to book it. Like this is my one shot if I want to go under 5 days. I can go as far as I can on this battery life, pass out wherever I pass out, wake up at 4 o'clock to dawn, and then sprint the final 2 hours to try to make it under 6:30. So I'm just sprinting through southern Vermont as fast as I can, you know, blistering 3 mile an hour.
I was about to say, yeah, sprinting at 3 miles an hour. Yeah.
But I actually I was going pretty fast. I'm not going to lie. Pretty big deal. And I was just going through my headlamp. It was like the best I'd run in at least a day, maybe a day and a half. I don't know what. It's like once you have that focus and kind of mental shift, it just shows you kind of the mental hurdles that you think you can't go through. But then once you get that kind of next gear or fire under your butt, you can move. So I just see my watch battery or my phone battery go from 24 to 15 to 10 to 5 and eventually to 0. But before it hits 0, your iPhone actually auto turns off the light at 2% and 1%. So I had 2 moments when I was like, oh, phone's dead, gotta sleep. It's perfect ground. That's nice, like nice flat trail, no rocks. And then I was like, oh wait, no, my phone still works. I have 1% left. Sure enough, when it actually hits 0, I'm on the middle of a lake on these like 2 sketchy plank boardwalks, you know, that are like distance from each other, that connect to each other. And then like look back and I'm like, there's no star, there's no moon in the sky, there's no natural light. I can't see. I'm surrounded by like some like marshy ferns, so I can't really see things too well. And if I step on either side, I'll fall into the water. And so I'm like literally stuck there. And I know I'm at least 100 feet away from the start of the boardwalk. And I had that thought go through my mind, like, this would be funny. But I'm stuck and I'm smack dab in the middle. And I realized the only 2 light sources I had were I had 4% on my battery, on my watch light battery, and I had 5% on my GoPro. So I turned my GoPro on and I used the back LED light of my GoPro, put it about 5 inches from the ground, and try to figure out the spacing in between the boardwalks to make sure that I don't fall in between them, and eventually make it after about 5 minutes of like, you know, feeling like a detective on the ground, following footprints before passing out.
Awesome.
Good story. Good story.
Hunter, do you have like a final question for Joe?
Yes,
before we
I do.
close out for you?
And I want to know this as much as anybody else. It's from Dan Cummins, actually, and he wants to know, what's your recovery routine? How do you deal with muscle tightness, soreness? What does your recovery look like after something like this?
After something like this, yeah, I'm a total bum, man. I go full deep end. Katie's like, Joe, should you take ibuprofen? Should you do X, Y, Z? And I say, yeah, that's a great idea. And then I don't do much of it.
Story of our lives.
Yeah.
I just want to say. No, just kidding.
Any tennis balls or any kind of like, what do you do?
Yeah, for like standard recovery, after something like I'm taking like 2 to 3 weeks rest after this, like full cold turkey from running. So it's a little bit different right now. Typically, like I have like lacrosse balls. I actually don't stretch much. I will do some self-care. Katie and I will give each other massages every once in a while, which help. But I find that strength and mobility work is actually done more for my injury prevention than, sort of traditional stretching, rolling out. I do like rolling out when possible, but I feel like I get more out of doing sort of light strength and mobility work to help keep your muscles sort of to keep them spry and strong for something like that.
Got it.
I think I would add that, in this case, I mean, Joe's body is so destroyed that rolling out his calf muscles with a tennis ball really isn't going to do that much of a difference. So you just need to let the body heal at its own pace. Yeah. Okay, Hunter, thank you very much for your help tonight. Joe and Katie, it's been lovely. This has been a lot of fun. So I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation tonight. Joe, maybe we'll hear some more follow-up on this at some point. And I'll be talking to you tomorrow at noon.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for turning out tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure.